Good.
Leslie, you're good to go when you're ready. Can't hear you, Leslie. Sorry. Can't hear you. Do you have headphones plugged into your computer by chance?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yours plugged in. Okay. Now calling the May 6, 2021 Mount Pleasant Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Kane, will you take roll?
Yes, just a reminder, please indicate your city, county, and state as we go through the roll. Commissioner Daly?
Bill Daly, Mount Pleasant, is a Union Township, Isabella County, state of Michigan.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Here, Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, Michigan.
Commissioner Honig?
Here in the city of Mount Pleasant, County of Isabella, state of Michigan.
Commissioner Irwin?
Here, City of Mount Pleasant, County Isabella, State of Michigan.
Commissioner Kingsworthy?
I'm here in the city of Mount Pleasant, Isabella County in the state of Michigan.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Mount Pleasant, Isabella, Michigan.
Commissioner Leash?
Here, Mount Pleasant, Isabella, Michigan.
Commissioner Ortman?
Here, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Isabella County.
And Commissioner Rice?
Here, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Isabella County, state of Michigan.
Madam Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
I move to approve. Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin?
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Aye.
Commissioner Leash?
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rice?
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 9-0.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes, starting with the April 8th, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin?
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Aye.
Commissioner Leash?
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rice? Commissioner Rice?
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 9-0.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the minutes for the April 8th, 2021 work session.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin?
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Aye.
Commissioner Leash?
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rice?
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 9-0.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Zoning Board of Appeals report. Commissioner Friedrich.
Madam Chair, we did not meet.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is communications. Mr. Kane.
Madam Chair, there are no communications this week, or this month rather, and there are no communications in the comment inbox.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public hearings, SUP 2107 and SPR 2106. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Go ahead and share my screen. Our public hearing this evening is a special use permit and site plan review at 906 South Main Street. This is a request to make modifications to the site of an existing registered student organization dwelling in the CD4 zoning district. This is a portion of the CD4 zoning district that permits registered student organization dwellings by special requirement. The future land use is mixed use median. Currently, the property is licensed as a registered student organization dwelling for 16 occupants. The applicant is proposing to reduce that occupancy to 12, which is the maximum permitted on the lot in this district. The property owner and applicant is Patrick Miller. The site area is 0.3 acres. The property in question is located at the corners of South Main, May, and South Washington Streets. This is generally 2 blocks north of the campus of Central Michigan University. The majority of the properties in the immediate proximity are either registered student organization dwellings or rooming dwellings. All of the properties to the north, south, east, and west share the future land use and zoning of the subject property. On the screen, you'll see a view of the property in its current configuration. This is taken from South Main Street looking towards the northwest. So you'll see in the distance May Street along the northern edge of this property. This home, as I mentioned, is a registered student organization dwelling. As best I can tell from city records, it's been a registered student organization dwelling since at least 1965. As I mentioned before, the property is currently licensed for 16, which is a non-conforming occupancy. The applicant is proposing to bring the occupancy into conformance with the code by reducing it to 12. Here's a view of the property from the corner of South Washington and May Streets. This would be looking towards the southeast. And you'll see at the back of the property, there is an existing parking lot area with a dumpster that's located adjacent to the sidewalk on South Washington Street. Looking back at historical aerial photos, I will tell you that this property in its original configuration has always had this through lot configuration. So there was, as best I can tell from the records, never a home at the rear of this lot facing Washington Street. It's always been in this through lot configuration. And finally, I wanted to include a historic picture of this property that is in the Big Picture Book of Mount Pleasant, Michigan by Jack Westbrook, because it, I think, is pertinent to the case tonight, where the applicant is looking to restore a porch to the front of the home. And I think you'll find, I don't think this is intentional on the part of the applicant, but the proposed porch echoes the architecture and size of the original covered front porch pretty closely. So I think this will be a great improvement and bring the property closer to its historical configuration, but also in line with other properties in the district that primarily do have front porches along South Main Street. Registered student organization dwellings are subject to a special use permit in the CD4 zoning district, and in accordance with that, they are required to meet 5 specific special use conditions. Those are listed on the screen, and the property does satisfy all of those conditions in the proposed configuration. On the screen now, you'll see an overview, a site plan overview of the property. This is oriented so south is up. So May Street is on the south, or the lower part of your screen. Main Street is on the left, and Washington Street's on the right. You'll see that the applicant's proposed porch is 14 feet in depth by 15 feet in width, very similar to the dimensions of the historic porch that was originally on this property. The applicant is proposing to provide new landscaping around the front of the property, as well as a new connecting sidewalk out to South Main Street. The applicant is looking at resurfacing the existing parking lot, adding code compliant screening to the parking area, and relocating the trash receptacle from the area that's approximately parking spot number 14 is labeled on this plan, moving that to the interior of the site closer to the home and away from the public sidewalk, which looking through our code enforcement records at the city, I will tell you that this dumpster would qualify as an attractive nuisance in the neighborhood because it is unguarded, unshielded, and it does attract trash and debris from other properties in the district, and its location next to the sidewalk is not particularly attractive and not code compliant. And so the porch, the parking lot improvement, the landscaping, and the dumpster enclosure and relocation will constitute major improvements to this property and its compliance with code. Just in quickly reviewing that site plan, staff's recommendation tonight does include some conditions which would need to be updated on a final site plan for approval at some point after tonight's meeting, assuming the planning commission approves the special use permit and site plan with the conditions recommended. In terms of setbacks, the building itself, there's no proposed changes to the footprint or size of the building. The porch is a permitted encroachment within the front setbacks, and there's no setback required for that porch in this district. It is set back at a pretty significant distance from both May and Main Street, but in any case, there's no standard which has to be met in terms of a setback for that porch. I mentioned that the building itself is consistent with the standards of the CD4 district to the extent it's being modified. The applicant is proposing the open porch and stairs, which are permitted encroachments. All the other encroachments that are proposed are going to be at the side or rear, which are areas where they're permitted. In terms of vehicle parking standards, the applicant's proposing to maintain the existing 16-space parking lot at the rear that has access from both May and South Washington. I'm recommending that the Planning Commission ask the applicant to remove the excess parking spaces 15 and 16 as shown on the proposed site plan. This would bring the property down to 14 on-site parking spaces, which was the minimum requirement under the previous zoning code. That would be 1 parking space per occupant plus 2 guest parking spaces. This would enable the area on the side of May Street where there's parking in the side yard to be removed and that area to be restored to landscaped area consistent with code requirements. The code does require 1 bicycle parking space per occupant of a registered student organization dwelling, which would be a total of 12 in this case. So we'd be looking for a specification for that parking to be provided on the final site plan. In terms of the, I've already covered the solid waste collection, moving that from the location where it currently exists next to the South Washington Street sidewalk to a location closer to the rear of the dwelling. We'll be looking for details on the specification for the screening of the dumpster to ensure that it satisfies code requirements. The applicant is not proposing to make any changes to the site lighting. In terms of private landscaping and fencing, because of the setback of the principal building on the site, there is a requirement for 2 trees to be planted in the front yard of the property, which the applicant is already proposing. In terms of screens, the applicant is required to screen the parking area from the street as well from adjacent properties. And all we'd be looking for in the final site plan is details on the species and the size of the plants at the time they're planted in order to issue final approval. And then in terms of streetscape repairs, the property does have sidewalks along all 3 of its frontages, South Main, May, and South Washington. Street trees are required in the district, in the CD4 district. There are 2 existing street trees on South Washington. We would, as a condition of approval, be looking for an additional 7 street trees to be planted, 5 of which would be on the May Street side of the property and 2 along South Main. That would be consistent with the minimum requirements for the district. The final site plan should show those trees as well as their species and size at time of planting to demonstrate compliance with code minimums. So with that, staff's recommendation is approval of the special use permit and site plan subject to the following conditions. 1, that the applicant remove parking spaces 15 and 16 and sod or seed the area. 2, that the applicant provide 12 bicycle parking spaces and a specification for those spaces on the final site plan. 3, provide a specification for solid waste screening. 4, provide a final landscape plan with the species and size at time of planting for all trees and shrubs. And 5, comply with the requirements of Public Works and Public Safety. Mr. Miller, the applicant, is present tonight to answer any questions that the Planning Commission might have for him. And in the meantime, I would welcome any questions from the Planning Commission, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any questions for Mr. Kane?
Well, I can start. So the reduction in occupancy from 16 to 12, was that a condition that was put on the applicant in order to get the porch and the parking lot, or did they want to do that?
Well, I can tell you from a code perspective, the maximum occupancy in a registered student organization dwelling in the district is 12. So that applies to all registered student organization dwellings that go through a process with the city. That's a requirement that's been in place since 2016 with the modifications to the former M2 zoning district. And so that would be a requirement before any site modifications could be approved that the occupancy be reduced to the code maximum.
So even though they're not changing the interior space, they're only changing the exterior space, they're still required to meet that one updated condition.
Correct, because it would, it would otherwise be a non-conforming use in the district, and there would be a limitation on the type of improvements permitted.
Any other questions for Mr. Kane?
Do we have to require that?
Yes, you could not approve this consistent with the code with that in place. The Zoning Board of Appeals would be the only board that would be in a position to permit an improvement to a non-conforming property. The planning commission doesn't have that authority.
And that's part of the application, isn't it? That isn't even a recommended condition because it's already part of the application.
Correct. If the recommendation or the request was a registered student organization dwelling for 16 occupants, staff's recommendation would be to deny and or to condition on the reduction of occupancy.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Kane? If the applicant would like to speak?
Not necessarily, Evan. I think we've gone over everything with Jacob already, and he's been more than helpful. We're just looking to comply with what we need to take care of and move on.
Okay, any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Daly?
So what are you holding the porch up with?
It would be cement. It would be a cement foundation as well as a cement pad. We originally thought of decking material, but needless to say, talking with the building inspector, that kind of got pushed aside. So what their criteria was for loads and things of that nature, needless to say, cement was probably the better bet. And that's what we ended up going with, as well as it also conforms with, when we were noticed looking around, all of the other porches.
Really? I've just done a major remodel on mine.
Okay.
Is 100 years old. And not that anybody cares, but inside one of the pillar posts,
sure,
the builder from 1916 had signed it.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
That was like completely cool. So
yeah,
I'm just interested in
trademark
techniques, and so thank you.
Mr. Miller, you want to sign the concrete here.
100 years from now, who knows, right?
And Madam Chair, I did want to, I think I glossed over the fact that Mr. Miller has made a number of updates to the property already under building permit. And so if you aren't familiar with what the property looked like a few years ago to now, it's already been significantly improved due to his efforts. And so we're really appreciative that he was interested in continuing to make improvements here to a property that I think had seen better days. And I think this is going to be constitute a really significant improvement. And I will tell you too, I don't want to undersell that dumpster as being a problem dumpster in the neighborhood. This would represent a major improvement to the district in general. Getting that dumpster relocated from the sidewalk and getting it properly screened, it's going to significantly improve the aesthetics of South Washington Street, and doing that, and hopefully also help the applicant and his tenants to not be dealing with other people's trash being dumped on their property.
No, I concur. I run by that property pretty regularly, and the improvements have been outstanding. And it does, right at this point, it does look like it needs a porch on the front of it, though. So
there's a little void. Yes. Yes.
Does anyone have any other questions for the applicant?
I do. How many occupants do you have currently in
We
the-
only have 10. We are new owners. We've only owned the property for, I think, about 2 years. So needless to say, we started off, I think, with less than that, because the old fraternity or whatever the situation was, they were failing miserably. The new tenants, there are, I want to say, 10 rooms, and that's how we've always kept it. A lot of places, they'll double up and triple up and things of that nature. No, there's 10 rooms, there's 10 people, and that's how it was. When it came to Jacob telling me about the 16, I honestly had no idea that it was even set up that way. But no, going to 12, that's fantastic, but more than likely 10 would be the max.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. And I will now open up the public comment portion of this hearing. If anyone from the public would like to comment.
Madam Chair, I'll note that we have no electronic communications at this time.
Thank you. And I'll open up discussion.
Move to approve SUP 2107 and SPR 2106, subject to the following conditions. 1, remove parking spaces 15 and 16 and solder seed the area. 2, provide 12 bicycle parking spaces and a specification for those spaces on the final site plan. 3, provide a specification for the solid waste screening on the final site plan. 4, provide a final landscaping plan with the species and size at time of planting for all trees and shrubs. 5, comply with the requirements of Public Works and Public Safety.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I
Mr.
just
King,
want-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the applicant improving the property and being willing to reduce the occupancy to do so. And I think that these kinds of improvements make our town a much nicer looking community and more beautiful for all of us to enjoy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Mr. King, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Aye.
Commissioner Leash,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rice.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 9-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is public comment. If anyone from the public would like to comment at this time.
Madam Chair, we don't have any electronic communications at the moment.
Thank you. I will close public comment and move on to the next item, which is the 2022 to 2027 capital improvement plan. Mr. Kane.
Madam Chair, as is our tradition at our May meeting, every year the Planning Commission is afforded an opportunity to review and provide a recommendation on the proposed capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan includes projects that are planned over the next 6 years that have a useful life of at least 10 years and costs in excess of $20,000. The recommendation from the Planning Commission this evening will be provided to the City Commission before they consider adoption of the plan in June. We have Assistant Finance Director Chris Saladin and City Engineer Stacy Tawari with us tonight to answer any questions or comments you might have on the capital improvement plan. I would ask that after the presentation and that discussion that the Planning Commission consider a motion to recommend the plan with any comments or suggestions that you may wish to include. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Mr. Saladin.
Good evening. I just want to thank everybody for allowing me this opportunity to present our proposed capital improvement plan. And what I have is a 10-minute pre-recorded presentation that hits the highlights of the plan. Good evening. Tonight's presentation is on the 2022 through 2027 Capital Improvement Plan. The Capital Improvement Plan is a tool that allows the city to maintain and improve our community's public infrastructure. These projects represent tangible improvements and changes that our residents can see and touch, and they have a direct impact on the community. The plan is a culmination of input from various stakeholders that allows us to analyze what is possible and then prioritize our expenditures to best meet the needs of our community. Tonight's presentation will mostly focus on projects that are planned for 2022. We're about to begin the process of creating the 2022 operating budget, so it's important to understand and be committed to next year's projects. If there are projects that we need to modify, remove, or add, we would appreciate knowing sooner rather than later so that we can incorporate any changes into the upcoming budget process. We will briefly also look at projects that are out in the later years of the plan. Projects that are included in the plan cost at least $20,000 and have an estimated lifespan of at least 10 years. So what's new for this plan? As you look at some of the project pages, you'll see in the detail that some projects were added or modified based on input from our approved master plan. The individual project pages now show how they are linked to our master plan objectives where applicable. Keep in mind that not every project page has a linkage to the master plan, since there are projects and infrastructure needs that fall outside of the scope of the master plan. When constructing the capital improvement plan, we look to many sources to gather input when deciding what projects to prioritize. One commonly asked question is what a PASER rating is. It's a 1 to 10 scale that is used to assess the condition of a paved surface. In our plan, this includes roads, parking lots, and sidewalks. The cash flow pages have a few purposes. They summarize everything in the plan on a few pages, so it's easy to evaluate the financial impact and timing of proposed improvements. This helps to ensure we have adequate reserves in place for future projects. I'd also like to remind everyone that the affordability of the projects listed over the next 6 years is contingent on the state delivering on its projected Act 51 contributions. This is important because we used to contribute CIP funds to our local street fund, as well as funding our sidewalk projects, which are now covered by the Act 51 funds. As we get into the individual 2022 projects, I'm going to give a brief explanation of the ones that are new, have changed significantly, or the most common questions that we get related to the capital improvement plan. In slides that identify grant funding, some of those projects don't have grants specifically identified at this point, but we're always looking for opportunities to use outside funds to improve our city. Our planned 2022 projects for city buildings are pretty straightforward. One new project that was not part of last year's plan is to address masonry, wall cracks, and expansion joints at our public safety building. We had a firm examine the condition of the brick and mortar walls, and they indicated that there are no structural issues at this time, but maintenance is needed to protect the building from unwanted moisture intrusion. For downtown, we are set to reconstruct the alley between Michigan and University, as well as the alley between University and Franklin. Based on prior direction from the City Commission, this project is set to be special assessed, with property owners covering 70% of the cost and the city covering 30%. The City Commission will need to have further discussion before the plan is approved. For our parking lots, we are designing parking lots 4 and 5 in 2022 for construction in 2023. It's worth noting that Town Center, which is parking lot 3, has been moved to the placemaking page. Based on master plan input and the City Commission work session from August 10th of last year, the placemaking project downtown reinvents Town Center into more of a public space by replacing most of the parking with green space and some amenities. Design work, estimated at $27,000, is planned for 2021 in order to have 2022 construction. The anticipated project cost is just over $1.5 million, with the city's capital improvement fund contributing around $500,000, and the remaining $1 million needed coming from MEDC grants. If this project is not ready to go forward in 2022, serious consideration about reconstruction of the existing parking lot will need to be had due to the deteriorating condition of the parking lot. For our streetscape improvements, we're looking at adding downtown amenities like stamped concrete on the edge of the sidewalk, tree grates, benches, bike racks, and trash cans to East Illinois between Main and Franklin along both sides of the street. This will be done in coordination with the street reconstruction and pedestrian lighting projects in that area. Our 2022 economic development project is the redesign of Mission Street to improve pedestrian and traffic safety. Design work in the amount of $60,000 is anticipated in 2022, with construction anticipated to occur in 2024 and 2025. For our parks, our Canal Street Park project adds a playground and swing set. Our East Side Park improvements is adding pickleball courts, repairing tennis courts, and redesigning the Horizon Park site plan for future year projects. Our medium-sized park project for 2022 is Indian Pines development plan and improvements to the Nelson Park shop. The Mid-Michigan GKB Pathway Connections project is the design of a trail that connects the GKB Riverwalk Trail to Mission Creek Park, and it also establishes a northerly connection point for the Mid-Michigan Regional Pathway System and supports the non-motorized plan to complete a connection point to Union Township. For public works projects, we have pedestrian lighting set to go on Illinois from Main to Fancher. And similar to the downtown alleys, this project is set to be special assessed, with property owners covering 70% of the cost and the city covering 30%. We will need city commission input prior to adopting the plan. Our new sidewalk is on Crapo from North Drive to where it dead ends, and Southmore from Crawford to Watson. Our sidewalk replacement is set for sections of the sidewalk that have a low PASER rating, as well as any complaint locations that we get throughout the city. The 2022 airport project is the design of our taxiway rehab. The construction is set for 2023 and is expected to cost just over $2 million. This is primarily funded through federal and state grants. Our 2022 local street project is reconstructing Illinois from Main to Fancher, and this is also in coordination with our streetscape and pedestrian lighting projects in that same area. Our 2022 major street projects are the reconstruction of Crapo from High to Broadway and the reconstruction of Brown from High to North Drive. Since we received the results of the SAW Grant Asset Management Survey in 2014 and 15, we've been communicating to the Commission and public that major plant improvements would be needed in the near future. Staff have worked at refining what the redesigned water resource recovery facility should look like in order to protect the environment and meet Eagle discharge requirements into the future. As reported at the last work session, the engineering study completed last year has provided the final piece of information to be ready to move forward with the improvements. These improvements will protect the Chippewa River and the residents in our community for many years to come. Once we have more information on the length of the bond terms and interest rates, we can more accurately predict how these major improvements will affect the rates that our utility customers will pay. Due to some 2021 projects being postponed, there are a total of 11 capital improvement projects scheduled for water in 2022. Most of these projects are more routine maintenance or replacement of existing parts in the treatment and distribution process. Looking beyond 2022, this is a list of our recurring maintenance and improvement projects. Also beyond 2022, this is a list of the projects that are more one-time in nature. Table 8 in the back of the capital improvement plan shows potential projects that are not in the current plan, but are identified as possible future projects. They may not be in the current plan because of funding considerations, or because we do not have enough information to put them in the plan yet. These are the topics that we will hopefully cover tonight. If we cannot get through all of the discussion items, we will wrap them up along with Commissioner questions at the May 10th work session. During the May 10th work session, we will cover any outstanding items from the April 26th work session, as well as answer any commissioner questions. We respectfully request commissioners have their questions to Manager Ridley by May 3rd. In addition to the work sessions, we were required to adopt the capital improvement plan by June 14th. The 2022 operating budget that will contain a lot of these projects will be presented to you on September 13th.
So I guess at this time, does anybody have any questions on the capital improvement plan?
I have a question. With the pathway heading north towards Mission Creek Park on, I think, page 61, it mentions both 2022 and 2023. Which components of developing or implementing that would be going on in each year? Is it just design in 22 and construction in 23, or how would that be broken down? Thank you.
Yep, give me 1 second to find that page.
Yeah, it's set up for 2022 design and 23 construction, but that would be dependent on being able to get some grant fundings to do the construction in 23. So that's subject to change. If those grant dollars aren't available, that could get pushed back a year or two.
I have a question. In our master plan and a lot of the discussions, there was also a lot of discussion about the rerouting of M20, and just wondered how I didn't really see anything in relation to even like prep work or anything like that we need to do for that. Is there any over the next few years, and just wondered what that would look like.
That's a great question, Commissioner Orman. I will tell you, I actually had a meeting with staff from MDOT today on Mission Street, and one of the things we talked about at the end of that meeting was the need for us to find a time to sit down and talk about the M20 reroute project. I tentatively have some funds, they wouldn't be in the capital budget, but some funds programmed for next year to do some feasibility study of that change, since that hasn't been done in a couple decades now, to see what type of momentum we might be able to get on that project moving forward. But that's a tentative plan now. I would expect that 2022 would be the earliest we might study that, and then any capital expenses would be in future years.
Any other questions?
Could you describe a little bit about what the placemaking is going to look like in parking lot 3 of downtown?
Yeah, my understanding of the project is where the parking spaces are now would be a green space, a public space, some amenities in there, and then there would be parking. The space would be shrunk up a little bit, and then there would be parking around the exterior of what currently exists, parallel parking.
So lawn and trees?
Correct, yes.
I have a question. I can see in table 8 of the improvement plan, there is reference to the Mount Pleasant Center, and partially because that's been a big deal over time, and partially because I'm new to this group, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the status of that and whether that's, I mean, is there a, I might be just ignorant, is there a commission planned or any kind of consideration being given to that project as time goes forward in any active way, or is it just kind of on hold indefinitely? Thank you.
Stacy, do you want to answer that, or do you?
That might be a Jacob question. Do you know the status of the Mount Pleasant Center property?
Yeah, I could tackle that. Sorry, my light just went out. Right now, we are awaiting confirmation from the state of Michigan regarding some of the terms that were included in the city's acquisition of that property. And with that still pending, that's kind of things are pending the resolution of that to know what is in fact possible on the property for redevelopment purposes. Similar to the M20 reroute, we are looking at some plans to start a process that would get us moving forward with some of the parceling of the property, so we had a better handle on what was developable, and what the topography of the site is, and what areas may be preserved as natural or open spaces in alignment with previous public engagement activities that happened around the center. But at this point, that's the most I know. I'm certain that once we have some of those lingering questions resolved, that there will be more active steps taken to start moving forward on the next stages of that project.
That was a great question, though, because there would be money for necessary for roads or utilities. I mean, that would be definitely a large capital outlay to get that ready for parcels or anything that we wanted to do there.
Yeah, and you'll see in on the last page that is why that's included there as a note to capture the fact that that's not at this point expected to occur necessarily in the next 6 years, but it is something that is expected to occur in the future. And so that page is meant to capture those items so that they're remain in front of mind as we approach this plan each year.
Any other questions regarding the capital improvement plan? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll recommend that the city commission adopt the 2022 to 2027 capital improvement plan.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote? Was someone about to say something?
Of course. I guess the only thing I really wanted to discuss was the downtown, the $1.5 million for landscaping for parking lot 3. I guess I'd like to see more detail or something. And I guess we obviously we don't vote on it, but I think it should be in the notes that that be a point of discussion for the city commission.
Part of that money for this program for planning the site is to look at what the engineering and construction drawings for what actually is going to go into the property. And I would note that cost would include removal of the existing parking lot, likely removal of some building foundations from the buildings that once stood at that site that we believe were demolished and pushed into the lot under the parking lot, reconstruction of a portion of North Main and West Broadway streets adjacent to the park to add the on-street parking to those areas, as well as the landscaping of the site. So I don't want to mischaracterize $1.5 million as being for trees and lawn, because that's not accurate.
Oh.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin?
Nay.
Commissioner Kingsworthy?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva? Mike, you're muted. Commissioner Kostreva?
You're still muted.
Can I get a thumbs up or thumbs down?
Here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll abstain.
Okay. Commissioner Leash?
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rice?
Nay.
All right, the motion passes 6-2.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Next item on the agenda is staff report. Mr. Kane?
Madam Chair, we have multiple items that'll be coming forward next month. We already have an application ahead of deadline for a site changes to a two-family dwelling on the east side of town. Likely we'll have some ordinance amendments for introduction to you coming out of tonight's work session. We do have 2 administrative site plan reviews that were received by the city this week that I'll be reporting out on next month. And then I would hope that, again, if all goes well tonight, we'll move back into our work session schedule and discuss green infrastructure next month, as well as an update to the Planning Commission bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Would anyone like to move to adjourn to work session?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Aye.
Commissioner Leash,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rise.
Aye.
Madam Chair, we are adjourned to work session.
Thank you. Does anyone need a break or should we just go ahead and start? Okay, now starting the work session. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So tonight is a continuation of our conversation from April in work session where we talked about some ordinance amendments related to missing middle housing. And at the time, the general consensus was that staff bring back additional information related to the two principal topics of discussion, which were related around requirements for two-family dwellings and accessory dwellings in our CD3L and CD3 districts, as well as potential opportunities to permit additional housing types in the same districts. As the Planning Commission is comfortable, I will once again, we'll start with item number 1 and then move on to item number 2. My objective this evening is to get sufficient direction from the Planning Commission so that ordinances can be drafted for introduction next month with the intent of those being able to go to public hearing in July. So there are any questions about that or concerns? If not, we can start the conversation. All right, so first topic, as I said, had to do with the requirements for two-family dwellings and accessory dwellings. As you'll recall, there are multiple specific special use criteria that apply to two-family dwellings and to accessory dwelling units, one of which relates to a principal residence exemption existing for any that are newly created that weren't already legally existing as of the date that the ordinance was adopted back in 2018. The rest of the criteria for both uses generally address the design and function of the units. The principal residence exemption requirement, I think, well intended, has had the effect of essentially making it not possible to obtain financing to construct two-family dwellings or accessory dwelling units. And so we have not seen any new construction or conversion of dwelling units since adoption of the code in the CD3L or CD3 zoning district for two-family use. That's not to say there hasn't been any two-family construction, but that two-family construction has occurred exclusively in the CD4 zoning district, which is a district in which two-family dwellings and accessory dwelling units are allowed by right. So they do not require special use permit approval, and they do not are not subject to the principal residence exemption requirement. I included in my memo the specific criteria that apply to two-family dwellings and accessory dwelling units, with the exception of that principal residence exemption requirement, just to give you a sense of what the other requirements related to design and function are. And I'm recommending for two-family dwellings that the Planning Commission consider an adjustment to the minimum square footage per unit from the current 600 feet to 1,000 square feet. This is to address some of the concerns that I've heard from you regarding the conversion of existing properties to two-family dwellings. And so you'll note that in the two-family dwelling special use permit criteria, finished square footage in a basement doesn't count towards the minimum square footage required for a two-family dwelling unit. And so by increasing the minimum square footage per unit in the two-family dwelling to 1,000 square feet, as opposed to the current 600 square feet, that would preclude, in many cases, an existing home from being subdivided into two-family dwelling. It wouldn't preclude someone from adding on to an existing dwelling to make it a two-family dwelling, but I think this would possibly circumvent many of the cases where someone might seek sort of a quick and dirty conversion of an existing home into a duplex. And we've seen that in the past where there are properties where someone's just simply installed plywood over a dining room door opening to create two units, or finished the basement and called the basement a separate unit and licensed it as a duplex. So this would raise the threshold for conversion and is consistent in staff's review of new construction duplexes around the city The vast majority of those new construction duplexes have at least 1,000 square feet per unit. In most cases, it's more than 1,200 square feet per unit. A 2,000 square foot dwelling in total would be very consistent with our lot sizes in the city in terms of fitting on a property and being practical to construct, whether it's 1 or 2 stories in height. So that staff's recommendation would be replacing the principal residence exemption requirement, or rather eliminating that requirement and adjusting the minimum square footage to 1,000 square feet. In terms of accessory dwelling units, because those are by their nature smaller than a principal residence, and that's true for the numerous accessory dwelling units that exist in the community already. They're typically somewhere in the range of 400 to 600 square feet on average of square footage. Staff's recommendation to address the concern that someone might buy a property and add an accessory unit just to create a student rental, a 4-person rental de facto, is that at the time of application to the Planning Commission, that the property hold a principal residence exemption, which would mean that it's currently homesteaded, currently owner occupied, but not to require that perpetually. So this would give the property owner the opportunity to sell the property in the future to someone who may not be an owner occupant, which is really necessary for someone who's not paying cash for a project to obtain financing from a bank. Bank financing for a property where what the secondary unit or the principal unit may not be able to be occupied at the time of sale, that obviously would significantly affect appraisal and is likely to preclude bank financing for the project. So I believe this adjustment would address the concern about, the quick and dirty creation of accessory dwelling units, while also opening up the opportunity for these accessory dwelling units to be created in accordance with the other special use permit criteria. So,
Jacob,
yes, sir.
would that special use permit then stay with the property if it was sold, or would the next buyer also have to do the same thing?
Special use permits always run with the property. So as long as the new owner complies with the requirements imposed by the code and the Planning Commission when it's approved, that can transfer indefinitely into the future. Are there any other questions about comments?
I think these two changes cover most of the concerns I've heard in our neighborhood anyway.
I'll let you all marinate on those, keeping in mind that this will be back before you in June for discussion and in July for public hearing if you choose to set one next month. So we'll have at least 2 more meeting opportunities to have additional discussion on that. Item number 2 has to do with missing middle, other missing middle amendments. And so you'll recall that last month there was some general interest in looking at creating some opportunity for different housing types in our residential districts in a couple of different scenarios. And so I've listed those here. One was as a replacement of an existing non-conforming use. So as an example, a rooming dwelling or a registered student organization dwelling in a residential area where those are not permitted under the current code or the zoning map. 2, as the rehabilitation or replacement of a vacant, blighted, or obsolete property. And 3, in areas that are identified for attached housing on the future land use map. And so I've provided, again, an overview of some possible special use permit criteria that the Planning Commission could implement relative to an allowance for multiple family dwellings under certain circumstances. I would like to point out that in looking at this over the past month, I am recommending with this that the Planning Commission consider this change only in the CD3 zoning district, not the CD3L zoning district. You will recall that the CD3L and the CD3 zoning district are generally the same in terms of use characteristics. However, the CD3L district has larger lot sizes and setbacks and is generally more suburban and single family in nature than the CD3 zoning district. So it's my feeling and recommendation that the CD3 district would likely be the most appropriate place to start with a consideration of this program. These are generally going to be areas that are already have a mixture of residential uses that are existing and likely non-conforming. And I think these are the opportunity areas where we could unlock some potential in properties and either reducing non-conformities or facilitating redevelopments of properties that are blighted, vacant, or obsolete. So I don't want to belabor all of the criteria, but I've essentially set up as a recommendation a two-step process for the special use permit. The first step would be to determine eligibility of the property for the special use permit, and the second part would be specific standards that the property would have to meet if it's eligible. And these are really targeted around narrowing the pool of properties so that every property in the district doesn't qualify, that you'd have to fall into one of these categories in order to, or you have to fall into two of these categories in order to be eligible. And then in terms of the standards, to make sure that the quality of the end product is sufficient. And so the principal thing I'd be recommending here is that our CD4 zoning district has more significant aesthetic and architectural standards. Our CD3 and 3L districts really don't contain those standards to a significant degree. And so by implementing those CD4 standards in the district, you're not going to get, you're going to get a higher quality of development in these cases, properties that have the appropriate glazing, roof pitches, door orientations, and other standards that I think in most cases would be more stringent than what CD3 permits, not more permissive. And that's really where this would be, is to look at where those standards are more restrictive, implementing the CD4 standard in lieu of the lesser CD3 standard. And then finally, number 3 had to do with the zoning, or the future land use map. And so with the newly adopted master plan, we do have areas of the city that are identified for attached housing that are currently zoned CD3. And in those cases, it may be appropriate for the Planning Commission to consider a zoning amendment that would rezone those properties to CD4. I've identified the principal areas of the the future land use map where properties are currently zoned CD3 but have an attached residential future land use. And so I'd be interested in the Planning Commission's consideration of if any of those areas or all of those areas are places you might want to consider rezoning as a method of encouraging or permitting or making conforming existing missing middle housing types in those areas.
Is this the time for questions?
Yes.
Oh, good. I was waiting. Okay. I really like what you've done here, and I think this is a really good start. This is a very specific question regarding the other missing middle amendments. So when I look at other missing middle, like in general descriptions, not in what you have, it's generally like a small apartment complex, and you have written it so that that can't happen. This is kind of like, it has to look like a home. It might be able to be like four, like kind of like a condo with 4 units like side by side, but they have to all look like homes. The only thing I'm questioning is that the part where it says at least 2 of the following shall apply, and there's 4 statements there. They all begin with existing dwelling. And if you read up in the top where you have 1, 2, and 3, you have item 2, it says as a rehabilitation or replacement of a vacant, blighted, or obsolete property. So if it's vacant, there is no existing dwelling.
That's a great question. My intention with that language, was for the word property to be synonymous with dwelling. And I should
Right.
have used the word dwelling, as that was my intent. My intent is not for this to be used on a raw piece of property in the district. It would be to address an existing dwelling that is in that category of vacancy. So the dwelling itself is not occupied.
Right. So item 2 should not have property vacant. It should be a rehabilitation or replacement of a blighted or obsolete dwelling.
Well, it could also be a vacant dwelling, so a dwelling that's not occupied.
Right, okay, so property should be replaced with dwelling. Okay,
And I want to
perfect.
clarify that the listing of 1, 2, and 3 isn't language that I'm proposing to include in the code necessarily. That's just kind of staff's memo. But you're correct that I could have been more accurate and precise in my word choice there. So
No, I just was like thinking of a vacant lot and I'm like, it doesn't meet the 3 or 2 of the 4 criteria, so.
that's a great comment. And if some of this language does end up in the ordinance, I will make sure that I use the adjusted verbiage for that. Thank you.
So now my question is, so vacant lots wouldn't apply?
Correct. The way this is currently written, that is not the intent. The intent is to address existing dwellings that are in one of those first 2 categories. Now, I will say, just for the record, the intent here is not to preclude the removal of said dwelling as part of the Planning Commission's consideration of the project, but the intent is that there's a dwelling there that meets these criteria as a condition of approaching the Planning Commission with the project.
Right.
So I would hope and expect that in most cases, this would involve rehabilitation, not replacement. But this would leave open the possibility that there are a handful of properties around the community that in their current condition would probably, without intervention soon, be in a position where demolition will be significantly more financially feasible than rehabilitation. And so in those instances, I do think it would be valuable to leave this as a pathway rather than the city just ending up with a vacant lot, which has happened in the recent past around the city where home demolition has occurred, where typically the lot remains vacant on the long-term basis.
So if you had, like, I'm just gonna use the state home property as an example. If that was zoned in a CD3, if any portion of that, they would not be able to build these property types in the CD3 portion of it. So if that was the intention of the Planning Commission to have missing middle property in that area, they should not zone it as CD3 as CD4.
Yes, that's correct. The only exception I would take to that is that there would be the potential in the distant future that a property in that area could qualify under bullets 3 and 4, or even potentially if the Planning Commission modified the CD3 district uses to make a currently legal use in the district not legal and thus non-conforming, that 25 years from now, if this code language was still in the code, a property could conceivably qualify. But in the immediate term,
get through 5 years.
No. So not forever 100%, but in the immediate future, yes, this would be intended. Also not for, on that example, a vacant lot in East Point subdivision, of which there are multiple that are still awaiting development. The intent would not be for those lots to be eligible for this missing middle amendment in those cases.
Unless they built a house and then tore it down. specifically.
Yeah, I mean, again, if they could, I guess, in the future qualify, but a problem, hopefully unlikely.
Yeah, that would not be cost effective. At $75 a sheet for plywood.
Are there any other questions? If there aren't any questions on items 1 and 2, item 3, with regard to the zoning map, are there any of those areas that are identified in the future land use map that the planning commission would be interested in additional conversation regarding possible rezoning to a multiple family district? And I should say, keep in mind that the preceding amendments, if adopted, would otherwise be eligible in these CD3 areas of the city. This would be kind of going a step further in allowing additional by right construction of 2-family accessory dwelling and multiple family housing under the same standards that apply in the CD4 district currently.
And what is it about these areas that makes them possible for change of zoning?
These are areas that are identified on the future land use map as being attached residential, which is a future land use designation that corresponds with the CD4 zoning district. And so these are areas, and some of these are also areas that were on our previous future land use map shown as areas for consideration of rezoning. So South Main Street being one of those principal areas that under our previous future land use map was identified for a possible overlay to allow for multifamily and office uses. It's an area that already has a number of multiple family and office uses. And so the CD4 zoning would be a district that would be permissive of those things. The value in that case and in some of these other cases would be to make existing non-conforming housing conforming, which opens and unlocks the door for improvement beyond the maintenance that's permitted under the code currently. It will also allow for additional conversion. And in some of these cases, there's probably more properties that would be available to convert than others. So as again, South Main Street, there's not a lot of conversion opportunity there because the bulk of the housing is already in a CD4 use category. It's just zoned CD3. Some of these other areas are probably more skewed currently towards 1 and 2 family, and the CD4 would allow for some additional flexibility.
I almost feel like this would be a whole conversation and looking at a map and some photographs of these actual areas. I mean, I know them, but I think it's kind of hard to picture all of them. Like, I don't think they're all the same is what I'm getting at.
No, I would agree with you there that there is going to obviously be, well, while most of these areas are in the northern half of the city, I think all of them are north of High Street. And most of them are, well, everything is west of Brown and east of the river. So we're primarily talking about areas that are in and around downtown Mount Pleasant. I can share, let me share my screen so that you all can see the future land use map. And I'll zoom in. So we're talking about on this map areas that are in orange So this would be the area of South Main Street and the area between Cherry and High. This is the area along the east side of Andre Street. These are the properties that back to Mission Street, as well as the area and this would be the 1000 block of South Arnold Street on both sides. And then the other principal area or areas would be here between Michigan and Chippewa. So this would be Graf Chevrolet. And then this area here, which is kind of in the area of where Wold's Motel and some apartments and some other uses are currently located.
That last one there, Jacob, that borders a CD4 already, doesn't it?
Yes, and actually, I should note that part of this is already CD4, the northern tier of parcels. So it's really just this southern tier of parcels that are on the north side of Bennett Street that are currently zone CD3, but in that attached residential future land use.
The area near the Chevrolet, I feel like that might be controversial, just thinking back to when they like expanded their dealership and the way residents reacted to that. So I don't know that rezoning that would be a good idea.
Yeah, there were some pretty hot people being treated high-handedly by Graf. So they said. Anyway, I'm not discounting them at all. They were very hot.
Yeah, well, I know they expressed a concern about, I guess, that use creeping over. So rezoning would certainly not help in that regard. I mean, maybe their position could have changed since then, but that's just the impression I got.
Yeah, and I would just note that that area is primarily the majority of properties in that area are single family, but there is a significant number of multiple family properties in that area as well, including a small apartment complex that's on Broadway Street. And so some of those properties, because they're not in the majority, they're non-conforming, so it does limit the opportunity for improvements and site changes to those existing properties. There's also an office building in this area as well on Chippewa Street. I believe it was once a chiropractic office most recently. And so those are some of the uses there in that area that a CD4 designation could potentially bring into conformance. But I would agree. I wouldn't expect that there wouldn't need to be additional conversation. I think what I'm looking for tonight is just a sense of, are any of these of interest? Is anything on this list something that you think, I'd like to talk about that more. I'd like to have more detail, and I can do the appropriate research and bring additional information back to the Planning Commission before anything was moved further in the process. It was noted in the last work session by Vice Chair Ortman correctly that given that we just adopted a new master plan, that it would be a good idea to look at that future land use map in association with the conversation on missing middle housing. And so this was just sort of step one of doing that, to say, here are some kind of low hanging fruit on that plan. Is anything here something that you'd like to consider tackling this year?
So I would say South Main Street between High and Wisconsin would be worth having a conversation about, and the north side of High Street and the south side of West Cherry between South Main and Oak Streets.
Side of West Cherry.
I'd be happy with just the other stuff we talked about tonight and kind of putting this off till later.
That's fine too. Since it's controversial.
Well, I could certainly understand. We have, we're a month behind on our work session calendar already. And we've got a significant and ambitious list of topics to tackle. And so what I will do is take the feedback obtained on this item number 3, and I will keep it. And as we move further into the year, if we make accelerated progress and get caught up, or if there's any desire on the part of the Planning Commission, if you would like me to accelerate progress on this, otherwise I'll file it away for consideration for conversation in 2022, if that works for everybody. But with that, I will also prepare some draft ordinances based on your feedback on items 1 and 2 and bring those forward next month for introduction at the regular meeting.
Sounds good.
Agree. I like that.
Great. Thank you all very much for the feedback. It is appreciated. And I will look forward to continuing the conversation at the June meeting.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. Second.
Mr. King, will we take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva.
Aye.
Commissioner Leash,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rice.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you are adjourned. Everyone have a great month.
You
You
too.
too. Miss you all.
We'll see you someday.